Maria Santos pushed her cleaning cart down the sterile hallways of Fort Harrison Military Base, her worn sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. At 42 years old, she had been invisible to most people for the past 3 years. Soldiers walked past her without a second glance, officers stepped around her mop bucket, and security personnel barely acknowledged her presence as she swiped her badge at checkpoint after checkpoint. This was exactly how Maria preferred it. Every morning at 5 a.m., she arrived at the base wearing the same faded blue uniform, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, and a baseball cap pulled low over her eyes. The other janitors knew her as Quiet Maria, the woman who never complained about the toughest assignments and always finished her work without asking for help. What they didn't know was that Maria Santos had once been Lieutenant Colonel Maria Santos, a decorated military intelligence officer who had spent 15 years serving her country in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. The woman who now cleaned toilets and emptied trash cans had once led covert operations in Afghanistan, interrogated high-value targets, and held top-secret clearances that gave her access to information most generals would never see. But that was before everything fell apart. 3 years ago, Maria's world had collapsed in a single devastating week. Her husband David, also a career military officer, had been killed in a roadside bombing during his 3rd deployment to Iraq. 2 days after his funeral, she received a letter informing her that she was under investigation for allegedly leaking classified information to unauthorized personnel. The charges were false, but the military bureaucracy moved slowly, and Maria found herself suspended from duty while the investigation dragged on for months. During those dark months of grief and professional uncertainty, Maria had made the hardest decision of her life. Rather than fight a system that seemed determined to destroy her reputation, she quietly resigned her commission and disappeared from the military world entirely. She used her savings to buy a small apartment in the town near Fort Harrison and applied for the most anonymous job she could find, janitorial services for the same type of military installation where she had once held positions of authority. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had gone from briefing colonels and generals to cleaning their offices, from analyzing intelligence reports that could affect national security to emptying their wastebaskets, from commanding respect and wielding significant influence to being practically invisible. But invisibility had its advantages. As Maria worked her way through the administrative building, she couldn't help but notice things that others missed. 3 years of intelligence training had taught her to observe details, to spot patterns, and to recognize when something was out of place. Even though she no longer held security clearance, her mind automatically cataloged inconsistencies and filed away information. She noticed that Captain Williams had been working unusually late for the past 2 weeks, and that his trash can was filled with shredded documents every morning. She observed that the security guard at Checkpoint 3 always seemed nervous when certain visitors arrived, and that he had started taking longer breaks than regulations allowed. She saw that someone had been accessing the building after hours using what appeared to be an unauthorized key card. These observations meant nothing to a janitor, but they would have meant everything to Lieutenant Colonel Santos. Maria's daily routine rarely varied. She started each shift by cleaning the restrooms, then moved on to the offices, conference rooms, and finally the common areas. She had learned to time her movements to avoid the busiest periods, becoming a ghost who appeared after meetings ended and disappeared before the next wave of personnel arrived. The only time her routine changed was when she had to clean the offices in the restricted section of the building. This area required special clearance, and Maria had to be escorted by security personnel. It was in this section that she sometimes caught glimpses of the work she used to do. Maps spread across conference tables, situation reports marked with red classification stamps, and the familiar urgency of people making decisions that could affect lives halfway around the world. On this particular Tuesday morning in November, Maria was cleaning the main conference room when she overheard a heated conversation between Colonel Henderson and Major Thompson. They were discussing security breaches that had been occurring across several military installations, and their voices carried a tension that Maria recognized from her own days of dealing with serious threats. As she quietly emptied trash cans and wiped down surfaces, Maria learned that classified information had been leaking from multiple bases, including Fort Harrison. The pattern suggested an organized effort by someone with inside knowledge and access to secure areas. The conversation revealed that military intelligence was baffled by how the perpetrators were obtaining such detailed information about base security procedures and personnel movements. Maria finished her cleaning and left the room, but the conversation stayed with her throughout the day. That evening, as she sat in her small apartment eating a simple dinner, she found herself thinking about the security inconsistencies she had observed over the past few months. Her trained mind began connecting dots that others couldn't see, patterns that became clear only when viewed through the lens of her extensive intelligence background. The next morning, Maria arrived at work with a new awareness. As she went about her cleaning duties, she paid closer attention to the details that had been nagging at her subconscious. The nervous security guard, the unauthorized after-hours access, the suspicious behavior patterns. Suddenly, everything began to fit together into a picture that both alarmed and angered her. Someone at Fort Harrison was indeed selling secrets, but it wasn't a sophisticated foreign intelligence operation. It was something much simpler and more dangerous, an inside job being carried out by people who thought they were clever enough to exploit the very security systems Maria had once helped design. For the first time in 3 years, Lieutenant Colonel Santos began to stir beneath the humble exterior of Maria the janitor. She found herself standing at a crossroads, torn between the safety of her invisible existence and the duty that had defined most of her adult life. The decision she would make in the coming days would not only change her own life but potentially save the lives of countless service members whose safety depended on keeping certain information secure. But first, she would need to convince someone in authority to listen to a janitor who claimed to see what trained security professionals had missed. As Maria prepared for another day of cleaning floors and emptying trash cans, she didn't yet know that her carefully maintained anonymity was about to be shattered by someone who possessed the one skill that could penetrate any disguise, the ability to truly see people rather than just their uniforms. Commander Sarah Mitchell arrived at Fort Harrison on a cold Wednesday morning in November, her black sedan pulling up to the main gate as the sun was just beginning to rise. She had been sent by Pentagon intelligence to investigate the security breaches that had been plaguing multiple military installations, and Fort Harrison was her third stop in what had become a frustrating investigation. Unlike the other investigators who had come before her, Commander Mitchell had built her reputation on seeing what others missed. Her colleagues often joked that she could spot a lie from across a crowded room and identify a security risk just by watching how someone walked. What they didn't know was that her exceptional observational skills came from a childhood spent moving between military bases with parents who taught her that survival often depended on reading people correctly. As Commander Mitchell presented her credentials to the security checkpoint, she noticed the guard's slightly nervous demeanor and made a mental note. Her trained eye automatically cataloged details about the facility's security protocols, personnel behavior, and physical vulnerabilities. Within minutes of entering the base, she had identified 3 potential weak points in their procedures. Colonel Henderson met her at the main administrative building, clearly frustrated by months of fruitless investigation. As he escorted her through the facility, explaining the various security measures and showing her where the breaches might have occurred, Commander Mitchell listened carefully while conducting her own silent assessment. It was during this initial tour that she first saw Maria Santos. The janitor was cleaning windows in the main corridor, moving with the efficient, purposeful movements of someone who had done the same task countless times. Most people would have glanced at her and immediately forgotten her presence, but something about Maria's posture caught Commander Mitchell's attention. There was a precision to Maria's movements that seemed inconsistent with her role. Her stance was too erect, her awareness of her surroundings too acute for someone who was supposed to be focused on menial tasks. When a group of officers walked past talking loudly, Maria didn't turn to look like most people would, but Commander Mitchell noticed that her shoulders tensed slightly, suggesting she was listening while appearing to ignore them. More telling was the way Maria moved through the space. She navigated the corridors with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where everything was located, not just from repetition, but from the kind of spatial awareness that came from tactical training. These were subtle signs that most people would never notice, but Commander Mitchell had spent her career learning to read such tells. Over the next 2 days, as Commander Mitchell conducted interviews and reviewed security footage, she found herself repeatedly crossing paths with the mysterious janitor. Each encounter added another piece to a puzzle that was becoming increasingly intriguing. On Thursday afternoon, while reviewing classified documents in the secure conference room, Commander Mitchell noticed Maria cleaning nearby offices with an escort, as protocol required. Through the glass partition, she watched as Maria efficiently worked around sensitive materials spread across tables and desks. Most cleaning personnel in such situations moved quickly and nervously, clearly uncomfortable with being near classified information they weren't supposed to understand. Maria, however, seemed completely at ease. More concerning, Commander Mitchell noticed that Maria's eyes briefly scanned the visible documents with the kind of quick, systematic assessment that suggested comprehension rather than curiosity. It was the way an intelligence professional would gather information, fast, efficient, and without appearing to look. That evening, Commander Mitchell decided to conduct her own surveillance. She positioned herself in the building's security office and watched the monitors that covered various areas of the facility. Around 7 p.m., she saw Maria finishing her shift and leaving through the main exit. But instead of heading directly to the parking area, Maria took a route that brought her past several key areas of the building, pausing occasionally as if to adjust her equipment, but actually observing things that a janitor would have no reason to notice. The next morning, Commander Mitchell arrived early and positioned herself where she could observe Maria's arrival routine. She watched as Maria badged in through the main security checkpoint, noting how the guards barely glanced at her. But Commander Mitchell also noticed something that made her breath catch. A small tattoo visible just above Maria's collar when she tilted her head to sign the entry log. It was a tattoo that Commander Mitchell recognized because she had one just like it. A small eagle with spread wings, positioned precisely where it would normally be hidden by a military uniform collar. It was the unofficial mark of military intelligence personnel who had served in certain classified operations, a tradition that most people outside the intelligence community would never know about. Commander Mitchell spent the rest of that Friday discreetly observing Maria while appearing to focus on her official investigation. She noticed how Maria's eyes tracked personnel movements with the systematic attention of someone conducting surveillance. She saw how Maria positioned herself to overhear conversations while maintaining the appearance of being focused on cleaning tasks. Most tellingly, she observed Maria's reaction when certain classified terms were mentioned in conversations. Subtle changes in posture that suggested recognition and understanding. By Friday evening, Commander Mitchell had reached a conclusion that seemed impossible, but explained everything she had observed. The janitor was not who she appeared to be. The question was whether Maria Santos represented a security threat or a potential asset. Rather than immediately reporting her suspicions through official channels, Commander Mitchell decided to approach the situation with the same careful observation skills that had made her successful. She needed to confirm her theory before taking any action that could prove embarrassing if she was wrong. On Monday morning, Commander Mitchell implemented a test. She arranged to have a conversation with Colonel Henderson in the main corridor at a time when she knew Maria would be cleaning nearby. The conversation involved discussing several pieces of classified information, including operational details that only someone with extensive intelligence training would fully comprehend. As they talked, Commander Mitchell watched Maria's reflection in the polished surface of a nearby wall. She saw the almost imperceptible pause in Maria's cleaning motions when certain terms were mentioned, the slight adjustment of position that would allow better audio reception, and most convincingly, the brief moment when Maria's eyes met hers in the reflection, a moment of recognition that passed between two intelligence professionals who knew they had been observing each other. That afternoon, Commander Mitchell made her decision. Instead of reporting her suspicions or confronting Maria directly, she chose a more subtle approach. She arranged to stay late in the building, timing her presence to coincide with Maria's evening cleaning routine in the restricted section. When Maria arrived with her security escort to clean the secure conference room where Commander Mitchell was working, the stage was set for a confrontation that would change both of their lives. Commander Mitchell dismissed the escort, claiming she would supervise the cleaning personally for security reasons. As Maria began her work, moving around the room with practiced efficiency while Commander Mitchell pretended to focus on her documents, both women were acutely aware that a game of chess had begun. Each was waiting for the other to make the first move that would reveal their true positions. The moment came when Maria, reaching to empty a trash can near Commander Mitchell's position, allowed her collar to shift just enough to fully reveal her tattoo. It was a deliberate action, a signal between intelligence professionals that meant, "I know that you know." Commander Mitchell looked up from her papers and spoke the words that would end Maria's 3-year exile from the world where she truly belonged. "That's an interesting tattoo, Lieutenant Colonel Santos." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge, an invitation, and a recognition all at once. Maria Santos slowly straightened from her cleaning task, her humble janitor's mask beginning to slip away as she prepared to face the consequences of being discovered by someone who possessed the one thing that could penetrate any disguise, the ability to truly see beyond appearances. Maria Santos stood frozen for a moment, her cleaning cloth still in her hand, as the carefully constructed walls of her new identity began to crumble. For 3 years, she had successfully hidden in plain sight. But now she faced someone who possessed the training and intuition to see through her disguise. "I think you have me confused with someone else," Maria said quietly, though her voice carried none of the submissive tone she had cultivated as a janitor. The words were a formality, a final attempt to maintain her cover, but both women knew the game was over. Commander Mitchell set down her pen and leaned back in her chair, studying Maria with the same intensity she would apply to analyzing classified intelligence. Lieutenant Colonel Maria Santos, former military intelligence, specializing in counterterrorism and covert operations. Decorated veteran of 3 deployments, resigned her commission 3 years ago under circumstances that, frankly, never made sense to anyone who knew your record. Maria's shoulders straightened almost involuntarily, muscle memory from decades of military bearing overriding her carefully practiced invisibility. "That person doesn't exist anymore." "Maybe not," Commander Mitchell replied, "but the person standing in front of me just spent 5 minutes conducting a professional surveillance sweep of this room while pretending to empty trash cans. You identified 2 potential listening devices that our security sweeps missed, noted the blind spot in the security camera coverage, and positioned yourself to monitor the corridor through the reflection in that picture frame." Maria realized that her ingrained training had betrayed her. Even while maintaining her cover, she had unconsciously reverted to the tactical awareness that had kept her alive through dangerous operations. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The tattoo," Commander Mitchell continued, standing and approaching Maria slowly, hands visible and non-threatening. "Unit insignia for Operation Nightfall. I have the same one. There were only 23 people who earned that mark, and I know what it cost each of us to get it. At the mention of Operation Nightfall, Maria's carefully constructed emotional barriers began to crack. It had been the most classified mission of her career, 18 months of deep cover work in Afghanistan that had prevented a major terrorist attack on American soil. The tattoo was more than just a mark. It was a bond between people who had sacrificed everything for their country and could never speak of what they had done. "Why haven't you reported me?" Maria asked, abandoning her pretense entirely. Commander Mitchell smiled for the first time since arriving at Fort Harrison. "Because I've been investigating security breaches for 2 months, and in 3 days you've shown me more about the real threats to this base than all the official reports combined." "I don't understand." "Captain Williams in Building C has been staying late to photograph classified documents. The nervous security guard at Checkpoint 3 is being paid to allow unauthorized access. Someone has been using cloned keycards to enter restricted areas after hours." Commander Mitchell ticked off each point on her fingers. "These are things you've observed during your cleaning rounds, aren't they?" Maria nodded slowly, surprised by how accurate Commander Mitchell's assessment was. "The investigation has been focusing on sophisticated cyber attacks and foreign intelligence operations," Commander Mitchell continued. "But you've identified something much simpler: inside personnel selling access and information for money. Your observations could break this case wide open." "Even if that's true," Maria said, her voice heavy with the weight of 3 years of self-imposed exile, "I'm nobody now, just a janitor with no credibility and no official standing." Commander Mitchell moved to the conference room door and locked it, ensuring their privacy. "Tell me why you really left the military. Not the official version, but the truth." For a long moment, Maria was silent. Then, perhaps recognizing in Commander Mitchell someone who would understand the costs of their profession, she began to speak. "My husband David was killed in Iraq. While I was dealing with his death, someone in my unit was selling information to insurgents. When the investigation started, evidence was planted in my personal files. False communications, forged documents, manufactured proof that I was the leak." Maria's voice remained steady, but Commander Mitchell could see the pain in her eyes. "I could have fought it, but I was drowning in grief, and the process would have taken years. By the time I was cleared, David would still be dead and my career would be destroyed anyway. So you disappeared. I took early retirement and vanished. It seemed easier than fighting a system that had already decided I was guilty." Maria looked directly at Commander Mitchell. "I've spent 3 years invisible because I thought it was better than being visible as a traitor." Commander Mitchell nodded, understanding the impossible choice Maria had faced. "The real traitor was never caught, was he?" "Captain Williams," Maria said quietly. "He was in my unit in Afghanistan. I've been watching him here for months, seeing the same patterns that I recognized too late before." "You've been building a case." "I've been trying to convince myself it wasn't my responsibility anymore." Maria's voice carried 3 years of suppressed frustration. "But watching him operate here, knowing he was responsible for David's death and my disgrace, and seeing him about to do it again." Commander Mitchell made a decision that would change both of their lives. "I need your help to stop him. Officially, I need a consultant with deep knowledge of the personnel and security procedures at Fort Harrison. Unofficially, I need Lieutenant Colonel Santos to help me catch the bastard who destroyed her life." "I can't. I don't have clearance, authority, or any official standing." "You have something more valuable than any of those things," Commander Mitchell replied. "You have the truth, 3 years of careful observation, and the tactical expertise to help me build an airtight case." Maria felt something stirring inside her that she had thought was dead, a sense of purpose, duty, and the possibility of justice. "What are you proposing?" "Work with me. Help me gather the evidence we need to expose not just the current operation, but the truth about what happened 3 years ago. Clear your name and get your life back. And if we're wrong, if I'm wrong about Williams..." Then you go back to being invisible, and I go back to chasing ghosts. Commander Mitchell extended her hand. But if we're right, we save lives and stop a traitor who's been operating for years. Maria looked at the offered hand, seeing in it a chance to reclaim not just her reputation, but her identity. For 3 years, she had been running from who she was. Now she was being offered the opportunity to embrace it again. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, taking Commander Mitchell's hand in a firm grip. The two women spent the next hour planning an operation that would use Maria's unique position and knowledge to gather evidence against Captain Williams and his network. For the first time in 3 years, Maria Santos felt like herself again. Not the broken woman who had fled in grief and disgrace, but the intelligent, capable officer who had once been trusted with her country's most vital secrets. As they worked together, laying out surveillance plans and evidence-gathering protocols, Maria realized that sometimes the most important battles were fought not on distant battlefields, but in the quiet corridors of everyday life, by people who had learned that true invisibility came not from hiding, but from choosing when and how to be seen. Outside the conference room windows, the sun was setting over Fort Harrison, but for Maria Santos, it felt like dawn was finally breaking after the longest night of her life. Tomorrow she would return to her janitor's uniform one last time, but now she would be wearing it as cover for the most important mission of her career. The mission to reclaim her honor and serve her country once again.